You're welcome, Ezichi. How are you doing? Okay, let's wait for others to join us, and hopefully they come and we can just commence. You're welcome, Philip. Welcome. Let's have a few minutes for others to join us. And welcome. Let's wait for a few minutes for others to join us. Welcome, Nse Abasi Udondian. Welcome. Let's wait for some minutes for some people to join us. Then, in just 2 minutes, actually, we are going to get started. In 2 minutes. Welcome, Joshua. Welcome. So, okay, even if we are just two of us, I'll just go over what I have to go over. So let's get started. I'll just share my screen now, and if you can see my screen, just say yes in the chat box that you can see my screen so that I can just comment. Can you? Okay, all right then, that's cool. So yesterday we covered a whole lot in CSS. We covered a whole lot in CSS. So today what I'm going to talk about is Flexbox, CSS Flexbox. If you can remember, we have been designing and all of our designs have been vertical. Like we have been building with HTML and all of our buildings have been displayed vertically, like top to bottom, just like that. But of course, we know that if you go to websites, let's come to this website. If you go to websites, you'd see that objects on website are placed horizontally and vertically. Like we have this section here and we have this section here. That is a horizontal placement. But in this section, we have this here, and this here, which is vertical placement. So it is important that you know how to place items horizontally and vertically. Now, to do that in CSS can be really easy, sometimes can be complex. Now, the easier way to do that is to use what we call CSS Flexbox. So Flexbox is what we are going to learn today. So I would write what it is. I'll say CSS Flexbox. That's it. So CSS Flexbox is what we are going to look at today. And with CSS Flexbox, we will be easily to properly place items horizontally or vertically. So let's come here in our HTML file. Let's take all of these out. And I'm still using the HTML document from yesterday. Let's come here also, and let's take all of these out, apart from this universal selector that I mentioned that it is used to reset the page in the browser. So we are not going to take that one out. Excuse me, we are not going to take that one out. That one is going to be there. So let's talk about Flexbox. So CSS Flexbox is a CSS technology that allows you to properly align your items or space your items however you want to align or space your items. And when dealing with Flexbox, you need to know these two things: container and items. Now, container and items is what we already know about. Remember, I talked about containers. I explained containers in one of our class, and that explanation still holds when you talk about CSS Flexbox. The explanation is still valid. Now, since we know what containers are, you'd ask yourself, what are items? Items are whatever is inside the container. Now, whatever you have inside, let's say this is a container and I have this here, it means I have one item inside this container. If I have a text here, it's still an item. Now, a container can also be an item inside a container. Like if I have this container, which is a frame layout, I can create another frame inside. I explained this before. So this logic still holds in CSS Flexbox. This logic is still valid in CSS Flexbox. So now, when you create a container with the div tag in HTML and you want to use CSS Flexbox to arrange the items inside the container, you can apply that command. Like you can set the container itself to arrange the items inside of it. It's just like in HTML. I mean, it's just like in Figma. Now, like I always say, design is always relative to HTML and CSS. Let's say I have this layout and I make it an auto layout. Now, if I make it an auto layout and I create any item inside of it, just like this, and I select the auto layout, let's give it a padding of, let's say, 64. Now, if I come here and I create another rectangle and I take it inside this layout, you'd see that the items are placed horizontally, like from left to right or from right to left, because the auto layout direction property is set to horizontal direction. Now, you can see that I had to set the direction property on the auto layout, not the items. Not the items. I had to set that on the auto layout. If I come here and I set it to vertical direction, you'd see that it will change the direction of the items inside the auto layout to be stacked vertically. And like I mentioned, this auto layout in this case is our container. So it is still the same concept in CSS and CSS Flexbox. If you want the items inside a div container to be placed horizontally, yeah, you will have to place that setting on the container, not the item. Is that clear? You will have to place that setting on the container, not the item. So now, if you can see here, inside this our container here, we have two items. If I want to create space between these two items, how will I do that? It means I will also have to create that setting on the auto layout container. I'll keep the auto layout container selected, come here, and I'll set the spacing between items to, let's say, 48, and you'll see that a space of 48 pixels will be created between the two items that's inside the container. So it is still the same logic. CSS Flexbox, the auto layout concept here was actually gotten from CSS Flexbox. That's why I always say that design tools are built around the principles of CSS. So if I come here, I can set the padding also. I can set the position. I can set this to center, set this to right. I can set this to bottom. All of these can be done practically in CSS with CSS Flexbox. So that's why if you have been following me, I always talk about the importance of understanding auto layout and all of these more difficult concepts in Figma, because when you understand this concept properly, you can graduate from just a UI UX designer to a UI UX designer that understands how to build what they designed, which is going to make you a UX engineer. And UX engineers are highly paid in the industry. So let's see how to use CSS Flexbox. Actually, let's come here. Let's create a container in HTML, and let's create items in the container. Now, how do we create containers? We create containers with div tag. Just like this, I have created a container. Now, let's give this div tag a class of container. You can call it whatever you want to call it. In my case, I'll just call this container. All right, then. Now, we have created our container. The next thing to do is to create an item or items inside the container. Now, I'd like to create other items inside the container. Now, I would like to create 3 items. Now, the first item I would create will be another container, like a div. Remember, I said that you can create containers as items inside containers. Now, I have created this first div inside this main container. So I'll give this a class of first sub. And I would have a text inside here that's going to say, let's have a text inside this first sub container. Let's give it a paragraph. Let's give it lorem 2. That's okay. Then I would create another item inside this main container now. This is my first item. I would create another item. So I can just copy and paste actually. Let's copy and let's paste. I'll change the class name. Always change the class name. I'll change the class name to second sub, and I would have the lorem ipsum text just be lorem. Then I would create my third item, which is also going to be another container. So I'll call this third sub. I would say third sub, and I'll change this to ipsum, not lorem. So if this creation is clear, say yes in the chat box so that I can proceed. If you are confused with how I just created this main container with 3 containers inside of it, acting as the items of this main container, if you are confused, say it in the chat box so that I can just clear you on which part that you are confused. But if you understand, you can just say yes in the chat box so that we can go ahead and explain how we can use CSS Flexbox to align the items in our containers. Okay, seems no one is engaging, no one is saying anything. So okay, then Nancy says it's clear. That's good. So now I would go to CSS, yeah, and before we go to CSS, let's load this in the browser. Now this is what we have: lorem ipsum, which is our first small container, lorem second sub container, and ipsum third sub container. So I would come here, I would select the main container in CSS, and I would style it. So I would come here, I would say container, and when I say container, I would set the background color. I would go to Figma and I would get some better colors actually. I'm tired of using not so good colors. So I would copy this color from Figma and I would set it here. That's my background color, and for my color, which is the color that the text or the icons on that background will have, I would go to Figma now. I would set this as my color. I would copy this. And if I go to my browser, let's see what we have. Okay, we have this. So this is not looking bad at all, right? So let's set a height. Let's set the height to, let's say 400 pixels. Not bad. Let's set the width. Now for the width, yeah, I would set it to 100%. 100% means that it's going to take up the whole width of any screen that it is being displayed on. That's 100%. Now 100px will not take up the whole screen. Look at 100px here. 100px is just this width. But 100% means that take up 100% of the whole screen size, take up the width, take up 100% of the width of any screen that you are being displayed on. And as you can see, this container takes up 100% of this width. So I hope that's clear also. So now that we have created this for this container, let's create for these 3 containers inside, these 3 sub containers inside our main container. So this one is called first sub, this one is second sub, and this one is third sub. So I can just directly say dot first sub, and I'll give it a background color of let's go to Figma, let's get a better color. Okay, I'll get this. So let's say okay, let's set a color of white. Let's set the color to have the same color actually. Let's just copy this. Let's paste that there. And if I come here in my browser, you'd see that I have this first sub container. I have it right at the top here, and it has that background color. Now let's set a height for it. Let's say height, let's set the height to 120px. Doesn't look bad. And let's set the width to 100%. Now, let's do the same thing for the second sub. Let's just copy this. We will change the color actually. Let's copy this. Let's call this second sub. Second sub is this class name here. for this second sub container. So let's say second sub. You can see that the color is actually the same, so we can differentiate. Let's set the second sub to blue. Okay, let's take out the hash sign there. And let's do for the third sub. So I would set this to third sub. And I would set this to green. And that's okay. So you can see that we have a container that has these three containers inside of it as items. But like I said here, they are all placed vertically, which is not actually cool. We actually want a situation where we can place the items horizontally or vertically as we want. We just don't want them to be placed vertically because that's not how websites are built. So how do we do something like that? Now, like we did in Figma, where you'd have to select the auto layout and apply that setting. Now, in this case, we will also select this container, which is the main container that has all of this children container. If this was in Figma, this container, this main container will be our auto layout, if this were to be in Figma. But in HTML here, we will just select this. And already we had selected it here, which is this container. So what I'll do is I'll come here. Inside the container selection, I would say display. I'll type in a property called display. Then for the value, I'll just type flex. When I type in flex and I go to my browser, you would see that the three sub containers are now being displayed horizontally, just like this. This one is here, this one is here, this one is here. Is that clear? Just display and flex had that sorted. Just say display flex. Just this line of code has aligned that stuff horizontally. Now, if just like okay, now we have aligned it horizontally, yeah. Now let's say if like this is in Figma, you can see that in Figma I created space, like some padding space around, yeah. Now, if I want to create a padding space here at the top, and I want this, like I want these three children items to have some padding at the top, how will I do that? I can actually come here and just say padding top. I can say 64px, and you'd see that there is a padding space at the top. If I come here and I just say padding, it's going to apply the padding on all sides, and we know that. So I'll take out padding top. Now let's go to Figma. Let's see something else. In Figma here, you'd see that I have space, this space between these two children. But in my website here, there is no space. They're all closed together. And if you go to websites, like if you come to this website, let's go to GitHub. I like to make it practical so that you see. If you come here, you would see that we have this container and this container, but there is a space in between, right? There's a space in between here, between this container and this container. So spaces are actually pleasing in design. So how do we create? No, Ezichi, yeah, you can also use flex to place items vertically, and I'm going to get to that just after I explain what I'm explaining now. So how do we create space between these items? As you can see, how do we do that? What you do is just say justify content. When you say justify content, you say space between. And if I come here, you see that it's not actually evident. And I would come here now. I would say space around. It's still not evident. If I come here and I say space evenly, you'd see that the space is still not evident. Now, this is going to make us talk about two major concepts in Flexbox, which is the main axis and the cross axis, because it is when you know which axis is the main axis or the cross axis that you will be able to actually place items the way you should place the items. But before we do that, let's answer this question by Eziche that says, so flex is used to displace horizontally, right? Now, by default, when you say display flex, your items, your children items in a container will be placed horizontally. But if you want the items to be placed vertically, you would come here and you type in flex direction, then you set it to column. Remember, column is from top to bottom. Like column is a straight line that goes from top to bottom. When I set this to column and I save it, if I come here, you'll see that the items are now placed vertically, no more horizontally. The items are now placed vertically. But if I come here and I can still come here and say row actually. And you see that it is now placed horizontally. But since this is going to place it horizontally by default, and if your intention is to place them horizontally, then there is no need to put the flex direction property and set it to row. Just put display flex, it will place it horizontally. If you have the need to place it vertically, then you add flex direction and you set it to column, and it's going to place it vertically. So if that's clear to everyone, you can just say yes in the chat box so that I would know that you understand how to place items horizontally and vertically using the Flexbox now. Great. So the next thing we are going to look at is main axis and cross axis. So when your flex direction, remember we just looked at flex direction here. When your flex direction is set to column, yeah, your main axis, let's write that. When your flex direction is set to column, remember column is a straight line that goes from top to bottom. When it is set to column, your main axis becomes the vertical axis, like the straight line from top to bottom. And your cross axis becomes the horizontal axis. Now, this is not anything technical, it's just basic mathematics. When your flex direction, let's go over that again. When your flex direction is set to column, your main axis becomes the vertical axis, because actually column is from top to bottom or from bottom to top. Then your cross axis, in that case, when your flex direction is set to column, your cross axis becomes the opposite, which is the horizontal axis. But when your main axis is set to row, or when your flex direction, like when your flex direction is set to row, or when you don't have a flex direction at all, you only have display flex. When your flex direction is set to row, your main axis becomes the horizontal axis, which is from left to right or from right to left. And your cross axis becomes the vertical axis, which is the opposite of the row direction. And that is from top to bottom or from bottom to top. So if you understand the main axis and the cross axis, just say yes in the chat box, and we are going to proceed from there. Okay then. So that's great. So like I said before now, you only have to set flex direction if you have to change the direction of the child items to column. Like if you don't have to change it to column, you just set it to display flex and everything is going to be placed perfectly. Now, I'd like us to try something out, yeah? Let's keep the display set to flex. Keeping this set to flex means that our main axis is now the x-axis, yeah? So let's come here. For the first sub, let's take out the width. For the second sub, let's take out the width. And for the third sub, let's take out the width. Let's save this. Let's go back to our browser and let's see what we have. Now you can see that we have this. Now this is not evenly placed. If I come here, I might decide to add a width value here. I'd say width. I'll set this to 400 pixels. Let's see how it looks. Not bad. Let's set this to 400 pixels also. And let's set this to 400 pixels. Now, if I go to my container selector here, which is the styling block, and now these three children items are now placed at the center of our container horizontally. And why is it placed horizontally? It is placed horizontally at the center because the main axis is row. Remember, when it's just display flex, the main axis is the x-axis, which is the row axis. Now, if I come here and I set the justify content value to space between, you'd see that CSS automatically creates an even space between these three items. Now take note, this space is between the three items. This item and this item, this item and this item. Now these spaces are even spaces. Like this is the same space as this space here. Now if I come here and I change this from space between to space around, you'd see that the space is, there is this space created here, and there is this space created here. Now, this space created on the right side is the same space as the space you have on the left side here. But this space created in between this red container and this blue container is the same space as you have between this blue container and this green container. So you can see how Flexbox allows you to properly space your items or build your cards. Now you can use this concept to actually divide your web page into three different sections, or two different sections, or even four different sections, and that's going to be really helpful. Now let's come here. Let's say I want to place these three containers at the center vertically. Remember, the cross axis in this case, the main axis in this case is the row axis, and that's because we set our display to flex. And since it is the row axis, when I say justify content, the content will be justified on the row axis, which is the x axis. Now, what if I want to place these three items at the center here? If I want to place them at the center here, such a placement is happening vertically, because moving this red, blue, and green rectangle from the top to the center here means that I am trying to move the three containers on the vertical axis, which is the y-axis. And the y-axis in this case, where we have our main axis set to row, is the cross axis. The y-axis is the cross axis in this case. So to align items on the cross axis in CSS, you'd use what we call align items, not justify content. Now, if I say align items and I set the value for the align item property to center, if I save that, you'd see that the three containers are now aligned to the center of this major container vertically. Now we have achieved aligning, we have successfully aligned the three containers on the main axis, which is the horizontal axis, and we have used the align items property to align the same three containers on the vertical axis, which is the cross axis. Now, just to make this easier for you to understand, anytime you want to use justify content, know that justify content will only affect the alignment of the items on the cross axis that you choose. Now, if I come here now, if I take this out, let's take this out. Let's take align items out. If I set my main axis now, let's use flex direction to change my main axis from row to column. If I set this as column and I save this, you would see that justify content, which is only going to work on my main axis, will now affect the items vertically. As you can see, the space around value now places these items vertically. It creates the space around these items vertically, which is now my main axis. So just always know that if I come here and I say align items only works on the cross axis of the main axis that you select. Currently, what is my cross axis? My cross axis is the horizontal axis, and it is the horizontal axis because my main axis, which I have set with flex direction, is the y axis, which is the column axis. So if I come here and I say align items and I say center, you'd see that it's going to align these three containers to the center of the main container. So is that clear so far? Or is there anything I have to explain? Okay, no one is giving me an answer. Okay then. So I think I'll just proceed. So that's all about flex direction, to set the display, flex, and all of that. Now, we have understood Flexbox to a very good level, like to a very basic level, that we can actually use it to do what we want to do. So the next thing we will do is this, yeah. I would like us to see how we can start a project here. So if we start that project, I would like us to see how we can finish the project. And I think building with that project might actually expose us to learning more about how websites and how CSS works. So if I can proceed with the project, you can just say yes in the chat box so we can proceed. Can you guys actually hear me? Am I still connected? Hey guys, am I still connected? Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right then. So this is the project I'd like us to commence. I'd like us to commence these basic projects. So to commence a basic project like that, let's clear all we have here. Let's come here and let's take all of these out. And let's see how to create a navbar. Let's see how to create this top section here where we have logo and this button. Let's see how to do that. So I would come here. I would create a container, and I would give that container a class of top nav, or you can call it whatever you want to call it. Now inside this container, I would create one item which is going to be a div. Now this div is going to be, we'll have a class of low. And I'll just have this be a h2 tag that's going to say logo like this. Then I'll create another item inside this main top nav container, and that's going to be the button. I'd say button, I would say share. Now if I load this in the browser, you'll see that I have this here and I have share here. So currently they are placed vertically. So using the Flexbox method or using the Flexbox knowledge, how do we make it look like this to have it placed horizontally? It's simple. All I'll do is I would come here. Let's give this button a class actually. Let's call it top button. So I would come here in CSS and I would select this container, which is top nav. I would say dot top nav. And I would set the width of top nav to 100%. I would set the color, the background color actually, to black. And I would set the color to white. Then I would set the height to 100 px. Now if I come to my browser, you see that I have this. It's beginning to make sense, yeah? So now I'd like to keep this logo here and keep share at this point. So I would come here, I would set the display to flex, and that's going to work just like this. Now you can see that this is being placed horizontally. We have this here and this here, not this under this now. So I would come here. The next thing I'll do is I would say justify content. I would say space between. And you can see that this is here now and this is here at the end. So what do I do next? I would say I'll set the padding value for that. I'll set the padding value for this top nav. I would say padding for the top. I would set the top padding to 24 px. I would set the right padding to, let's say, 120 px. I would set the bottom padding to 24 px, and I'll set the left padding to 120 px. Let's save that. Let's see what we have. So you can see that we have this now. We have this here and we have this here. Not looking bad at all. So the top padding needs to go up, like we need more space at the top. So I can set the top padding to 34 px, and that's okay. Is anyone following? Is anyone following at all? Okay. So the next thing to do is this. This space grotesque family or font family is not actually applicable to our text. As you can see, this share button here, logo text, this logo text is not actually the space grotesque font family. So let's go to font.google.com. Let's get the CSS selector. This is it here for space grotesque. I would select it. I would come to my VS Code. I would go to my CSS file. Remember, we had already placed the link in the head tag. We have not only worked on the CSS file. So I would come here in the universal selector and I would paste that font family. Now, when I go back to my website, you see that this now looks like the space grotesque font family. So what do we have to build next? You see that so far we have just built this. This is as easy as that. Now we have to build this section that says next gen next, this section and this section here. So let's do that. To do that, I would also create another container in HTML. I would come here, I would create another container. And I would call this, you can call it whatever you want to call it. I'll give it a class and I would call that class body container. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Then I would come here. Inside this container, I would create two items, and those two items will be sub containers. So I would say, I'll call this, I'll give it a class of, I would say left content, because I would like this to stay at the left. And I would give this, I would create another container, another sub container, and I'll give it a class of right content. So inside the left content, I'd like to have this text that says next gen next, and that's going to be a H1 text or a H2 text. So let's say next gen next. Now, after next gen next, inside the left content container, I'd like to have a paragraph tag that will have this lorem ipsum. So I'll just say lorem, I'll create a paragraph tag, and I would say lorem 88, and that's it. Now take note. I think it is a lot. It is a lot. So let's say lorem 24. That's enough. Lorem 24 is enough. So take note, yeah. This is the main container that I created, called the body container, and inside the container I have the first container item, which is this div here that has a class of left content, and the second item I have inside this body container is this div here that is called right content. So I will create content for this right content. In my design here, the content is just this image. This image is just the content, and I think I have this image in my computer here. So what I'll do first of all is to create an image folder in my project folder. Remember, we talked about that before now. So I would go in my project folder here. I think this is new. Okay, so I would come here. I would create an image folder in my project folder. I would call these images. Then I would go look for that image in my computer. And I think that image is somewhere. It's somewhere in my downloads folder here. So I think it's okay. Let's say maps. I think that's it there. Okay, this is the image, so I think I'll just look for it. I have it. Sorry for that. Okay, this is it here. So I would copy it, and I would go and paste it inside my images subfolder that I created inside the project folder. And this is it here. I can rename it actually to world map or whatever. I can say world map. That's fine. So I would close this now, and I would go back to my VS Code, and you'd see that in my VS Code, the images subfolder is being created. If I open it, you'd see the world map.svg image there. So in this right content container, I want to place an image just like what we have here in our design. So I would create an image tag here. And for the src attribute, I would go to my images folder and I would select that world map.svg file. Now in my alt attribute, I talked about the alt attribute like 2 days ago. In my alt attribute, I would just say world map. You can type in whatever you want to type in there, and that's fine. Now, when I save this and I go back to my website, you'll see that I have the image here and I have the next gen next text here and this lorem ipsum. Now, as usual, it will be placed vertically. It is our duty to use Flexbox to place these items horizontally. Is anyone following? All right, then. So what I'll do at this stage is to select the body container here, which is the main container. So I'll select the body container, and I'll set the display property to flex. Now I'll set the width to 100%. I'd like to set the height. I would like to set the height to, let's say, 700px. I would save that. Now, if I save that and I go back to my browser, you'll see that the two items inside the container are now placed horizontally. I have this placed here and I have this placed here. So what we can do now is to actually use the cross-axis alignment property to align the both items to the center vertically. So I would use align items, which is for the cross axis. Remember that. I would say align items and I would set this to center. And you'd see that this is placed at the center now. And that's actually okay. Now I would want this next to start at the same line as this logo. And to do that, we will use the padding property here. I'll just select this. I'll paste this, and for the top, I'll set this to 0. For the left, I'll set this to 120, and I'll take these two out. Now, when you have your padding value set like this, CSS will automatically apply this 0 value to the top and bottom, like to the y-axis, and CSS will automatically apply this value to the left and right, which is the x-axis. So when I save this, you would see that the padding is now effective here. I have this space created here and this space created here. So what we can do is to go ahead and give the background color black and give the color white. And we have this. So it's just as easy as that. So at this stage, what you can do now is to actually reduce the size of this image here from this really large globe to something smaller. If this is okay for you, you can just let it be like this. Now, if you come here in the design, you'll see that we have a button here that says next and learn, and we have a button here that says share. Now let's create this button and let's style the both buttons to look like that. So what I'll do is this. I'll go over to VS Code, and inside this first child container, which is for the left content, I would create that button right under the paragraph tag. I would say next and learn. And I come here in my browser, you'd see that I have the button here. So how do we give this button some styling to make it look better? I would come here, I would give this button a class, and I would call the class top button also. That's because I want it to have the same styling as that top button. So if I go in CSS and I call the top, or I select the top button class, it will affect those two buttons. So I can say color. Okay, I won't even actually set the color. Let's just set the height to, let's say 48px. Let's see how it's going to look like. 8px is pretty okay. And for the width, yeah, let's set the width to 120px. And 120px is pretty okay also. Now let's set the color, the background color and the corner radius. But let's set the border radius first. Now border radius in CSS is the same thing as corner radius in Figma. Like this corner radius value that's this corner radius value that we own in Figma. In CSS, it is called border radius. So I would say border radius, and I would set border radius to 8px. Let's go back to our website. I would set border radius to 8px. Then I would set the outline value to none. Then I would set the border value also. Now these values, I would explain what these values do actually. Set this to none. Now, when you create a button in HTML, there is this hard edge. There is this hard or this strong dark edge that is always lining around the button. To take out that hard edge, set your outline value to none and your border value to none, and you'd be good to go. So let's create a gradient. Let's create a gradient color effect for this button and this button. Yesterday we saw how to do that. Just go to cssgradient.io. When you get to cssgradient.io, select your gradient color, then copy the code and paste it. Let's select this. Okay, let's select this. Let's try this and see. Let's copy this. Let's go to our CSS and let's paste this. Let's see how it's going to look like. If it looks ugly, we look for something better. Okay, this looks bad actually. It looks ugly. So let's okay. Let's try something else. Let's see if this is going to look good. It doesn't really look bad. This looks cool actually. This looks cool. So let's leave it set like this, and let's set the font weight of the button text. Let's set it to bold. That's okay. So the next thing I would like for us to do is to create some space between this lorem ipsum text and this button. Now to do that, you can just set a bottom padding space for this lorem ipsum text, a bottom margin space. When you set that bottom margin space, a space will be bottom of the lorem ipsum text, thereby creating a space between the lorem ipsum text and this next and learn button. So the lorem ipsum text is this p tag. So I would create a class for it, and I would say lorem. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Now I would come here in CSS and I would select that lorem class. Now I would say margin bottom. Now I'd set it to 24px. And you'd see that a space is being created here, and this looks really good. So I'd like a space at the top also between next gen next and this lorem ipsum text. So I would say margin top, and I would say 24px. Now this looks really okay. This looks really okay. Now you see that we have been able to achieve this with Flexbox in just a matter of minutes. So I'd like to hear from anyone. If you have any questions so far, you can just say them in the chat box, or you can just indicate that you have a question, and I would address the question. But if you don't have any questions, I would assume that clearly you understand what I have been saying so far. So you can see that we have been able to build this in just a matter of minutes. Okay, it means everyone understands. Everyone understands what we are actually saying. Okay, I can see some people are no more in the chat in the session. I can see Eniobiong there. I can see Ezichi is still there. I can see Oluwatobi is there. So if you have any questions, you can just say them in the chat. But if you don't have any questions, definitely the session will be available on YouTube. You can definitely check out the session later on YouTube to learn and to understand what you have to understand better. So guys, this is Flexbox actually. So this is Flexbox. That's what I actually wanted us to do with Flexbox. And this is going to be where we are going to draw the curtains for the CSS session, for the CSS class. So far, we have covered so many topics in CSS, and eventually I'll be rolling out more content on YouTube, and also I would also have a bootcamp coming up anytime soon, where you guys can come and learn advanced CSS. You can also check my YouTube channel from time to time. I'll drop some content there to teach advanced CSS. Then you can use this knowledge to actually go in smoothly from any point I would have to start from on my channel. So this is where we are going to draw the curtain for today. This is what we have achieved so far with CS Flexbox. We have seen how to use Flexbox to achieve all of this, and we have seen how this has been able to translate to this. So that's cool. So see you guys next time. Take care, everyone. See you guys next time. Thank you all for joining.